Hello and welcome back to MILELE readings. We're on chapter 38. Things are getting really wrapped up. We finished 37 with the news that Nathan and Faith have indeed gotten married. And he gave his lion pendant to her in lieu of a wedding ring, which is very significant because the pendant is very, very precious to him. We learned some new things about Faith, about her meaning of her names, of her middle and maiden name, now her maiden name, are fruit and gift. So they are now approaching the Eden 2 waters where they are met with it's a lot of people waiting for them and they're not friendly. So they are overwhelmed by that, of course. Now, of course, Hope is in the middle of all of that. She has met with the world chancellor. She was in a room with them, with him, with Mendax Nobian and Scarlet Babylon. The threesome were really unsettling to her. Of course, she notices more and more that Keiko is so different. His eyes are different, and he has an aura of Teseb, who she still has not seen. He also has a symbol that on a ring with a symbol, and has declared that it is the identification of the world chancellor, which every person 12 and up will need to have somewhere on their person to be able to live a regular life. And he is inviting Hope to be the first. Well, she's absolutely not going to do that because she knows now what he's all about. And she is having a hard time being there with baby Moses, really wanting to just leave with the baby. But at one point, Agios's presence was felt and made a difference because it just seemed like they were in a powder keg of a meeting, especially with Agent Mike not backing down and Keiko really unhappy that he's there. They were able to keep out Lieutenant Gideon and Captain Nick, but for whatever reason could not keep Agent Mike out of this meeting. Let's see, what else do we need to know? Also, it's interesting to see everyone out of their suits. They no longer need the suit because the mist that was around the Eden 2 has receded. It's also changed, and so now outside of the Eden 2 new white mist, people are able to do without the suit, even though they're closer to the island now. Let's see. Yes, and we also find out from Nathan, or not Nathan, but from Keiko, that he's responsible for the disappearance of the 3 descending members of the Council of Nations, the one who were not for the world rule. And Hope continues to be strong and brave and speaks out and stands her ground with Agent Mike supporting her. And of course, just as things are about to explode, we get word that Nathan's ship has been spotted. And so that is going to be another battle. Did anyone figure out Teseb's name yet? So if you flip his name, it spells Beast. Beast. All right. With that, we'll go off to chapter 38. And of course, now everything is happening on the Eden 2 waters in the Atlantic Ocean. As officers and other crew members rushed to various stations, Nathan held tightly to Faith's hand. The captain had insisted they move to safe quarters, but Nathan knew it was pointless. Keiko Bays wanted him, and Nathan didn't want anyone else in harm's way. The merchant ship was now surrounded by Council of Nations assault vessels. Even though the captain and crew had been trained for such a day, Nathan was determined that the only casualty would be himself. Unless Eden Two forces could successfully rescue the men and women of the merchant ship, they would all be convicted and imprisoned. But at least they would still be alive. Nathan looked at Faith. He sent out an urgent triune connect in his mind. Please, please rescue her. Rescue my beloved and these brave men who've risked their lives for your work. Nathan could see it in her eyes. Faith, his personal security, wanted to fight and protect him. But Faith, his wife, wanted to die for him or die with him. He squeezed her hand. Please, Faith, I have to go. He touched her face gently, realizing it might be the last time. Seeing the tears in her eyes and the stubborn set to her mouth, he knew the battle within her was greater than any battle he would face out there. He pulled her to himself, hugging her tightly. Please let me go, he said. You're no longer my security. You're my wife, and I want you safe. I won't live without you, she said. Faith, she shoved away from him. I won't stay while you go. The old Faith was before him, firm and resolute, and Nathan realized the futility of his request. They were one body now, one flesh. Where could he possibly go where she would not follow? New scene. Hope was trembling from head to toe. Her heart was overwhelmed with fear and worry for her brother. The large merchant ship was surrounded by combat boats like an elephant cornered by armed poachers. She looked at Agent Mike, who'd kept her by his side when they'd rushed out on deck. Lieutenant Gideon had relieved her of baby Moses, whose wails of protest could barely be heard over the sudden and frenzied surge of activity. The earlier calmness of the Atlantic shifted. Larger waves swelled the ocean, causing the small ship to rock. What will they do to him? Hope asked. Captain Nick appeared on the other side of her, completing the buffer against the movements of the military crew. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and raised his voice above the noise. They will seize the ship and apprehend him. They will all be arrested? Yes, I believe your brother will give himself up to avoid deaths. Captain Nick lifted his chin to yell above her head. Agent Mike, what's your plan? Agent Mike had been watchful and silent, but his stance was of one very much on guard. He turned and looked up. Hope followed his stare to the bridge wing of the ship. Keiko Bays, with binoculars held up, stood looking out. Before they'd left the mess room, Keiko had already started barking radio orders to the commander of the fleet. Now he stood there with several military officers around him, along with Scarlet Babylon and Mandax Nabian. Agent Mike looked at Captain Nick, but before he could utter a word, the initial whistle of artillery sounded. A charged silence followed. Hope's heart thumped. Captain Nick broke the momentary silence. What? They're shooting already? New scene. Nathan couldn't believe what he was hearing after just boarding the Council of Nations ship. Moments earlier, after the captain and crew had finally agreed to his peaceful surrender, Nathan had traversed what seemed the longest journey of his life down from the bridge to the boarding deck. Faith had refused to stay back and had walked with him the whole way. By that time, the captain and the entire crew had also gathered with them. Council of Nations forces had boarded and quickly and efficiently cordoned off the captain and crew from Nathan. After Faith had boldly declared herself to be his wife, the Council of Nations team leader made the decision to keep them together. Wrist restraints had been applied to both. Sea and faith restraint had caused the captain and crew of the merchant ship to start protesting. Warning artillery fire had resulted. Now, after stepping on board the Council of Nations ship with faith, the words uttered by the greeting officer dropped like a bomb. Nathaniel David Kanisa, former executive assistant to the former world envoy, present world chancellor, the order has been given for your immediate execution. Nathan heard Faith's sharp intake of breath before she started protesting loudly. His only thought was how to keep her alive, how to send her to his sister. New scene. The ship Nathan had boarded was approaching their ship. Gripping her ship's rail, Hope strained to see him. He was facing them and was clearly being held at gunpoint. There seems to be someone with him, a woman, she yelled at Captain Nick, who was standing beside her, looking over her head. It looks that way, he responded. Agent Mike and Lieutenant Gideon were close by. Baby Moses was sufficiently distracted by his temporary caregiver, or perhaps by the sights and sounds around him. The ship with Nathan slowed. What's happening? Hope asked. A steady weight had been growing in her chest. She stepped back from the rail and looked up. Keiko Bays remained a permanent fixture on the bridge wing. Knowing his real identity, she expected no mercy for her brother. In fact, she expected far worse. Was it her imagination, or was he looking directly at her? Hope received the answer all too soon. Using a megaphone, Keiko shouted her name. With all attention focused on him, Keiko looked down and repeated her name. Hope Kala Kanesa, this is what you have done. His voice, amplified by the megaphone, filled the air with arrogance and anger. Your brother stands there condemned. What will you do? Will you join me or will he die? Right there, right now. Hope felt frozen as if in a nightmare, running away from danger, but unable to make any headway. She felt Agent Mike, rather than seeing him, move closer to her. First he used the baby, now he's threatening her with her brother, Captain Nick said, sounding incredulous. He knows he can't harm the child, Agent Mike said. Then he spoke Hope's name. Hope looked at Agent Mike, then at her brother in the distance. She couldn't make out Nathan's facial expression, but she could almost feel his permission, knowing what his response would be. Please, what do I do? She thought. She looked toward the bridge again. Hope, Agent Mike called, more urgently. She looked at him. He said, You must speak your decision. Let Sovereign Emperor know your will. Let Sovereign Prince know your choice. Sovereign Ambassador will empower you. Hope closed her eyes. Tears gathered. Her throat ached. Her chest burned. Agios's presence blending her will with theirs. She knew what her response must be. She opened her eyes. Agent Mike was before her, eyes full of purpose and determination. Turning back to the rail, she grabbed hold and placed one foot on a lower rung to shove herself up. With the upper half of her body braced over the top rail, she cried out, Nathan! Nathan! I love you! The tears flowed as her voice rang over the water. I love you, Nathan. I love you. Her last words ended in a whimper. She saw his bound hands raised. He waved them. Then the unthinkable happened. New scene. Just when his heart nearly burst with the mixed joy and pain of seeing and hearing his sister, Nathan felt something pressed to the back of his head. Faith held restrained by two big men, was struggling and crying out. The desperate look in her eyes broke his heart. He smiled, never looking away from her. At least, he had not meant to look away. But then there were sudden movements from Eden 2's direction, followed by thunder-like sounds. Flames? Once again, the mist had changed. The island was surrounded by a massive wall of fire. The blast came. Nathan! His wife? Or was it his sister that cried? The impact on his head crashed his world terribly. Darkness soon followed, and he felt as if he were falling to nowhere. A sea of stillness, of weightlessness, and then the struggle from his body. Soon he was free, looking down, floating up. He saw them, heard them. He lingered for... Time didn't matter, no longer existed. Then he felt the call, the beckoning. He was in the mist patch, and someone was with him, guiding him to where hope had been the first to go. He followed Agios over the crystal clear river to the other side. New scene. Hope was vaguely aware of thunder just before her brother was shot. His name came rushing from the depths of her being in deep agony and loss. Her head grew foggy, but she could still hear Agent Mike. Take the child. The woman and the crew must all be saved. Light blinded her, then cleared. Agent Mike was standing sideways beside her. He looked different. The light that had blinded her surrounded him like a bright cloak. In his hand was a magnificent sword, gleaming with restrained power. She collapsed. New scene. Let's take a breath. Hope slowly emerged from a place of warmth and shelter. Agios had been there, like when he'd first rescued her from the ocean and brought her to Eden 2. Then he'd sheltered, clothed, nourished, and taught her. With him, she'd learned about the sovereigns more personally than with her parents or with leader Chanli at the atrium. Agios had brought the truth tome to life in a way no one else ever had or ever could. Now, the remnants of his visitation during her semi-conscious state clung to her. He had brought back the memories of her time beyond the mist patch, bringing her to a whole other level of understanding. Sovereign Emperor, Sovereign Prince, Sovereign Ambassador, separate yet one. Sovereigns or Sovereign Triune. They had even designed humans similarly, their physical part, the body, inhabited by their inner being, the spirit, allowed for the formation of their inner person, the soul. 3 parts, but 1 person. But the Sovereign Triune was most powerful. Nothing or no one could compare to their power and glory. Nothing could compare to their works. Outside of their perpetual goodness and light was perpetual evil and darkness. Humanity had been given a choice. Many continued to believe the destructive lies of the Veltskis that humans could be their own ultimate authority and still enter the place of perpetual light. Even now, in her sleep-wake state, Hope could hear Agios's voice. He had said, "But those who have chosen Sovereign Prince and his sacrifice freely given will be reunited with the sovereigns. Once the darkness of this world is cleansed and it is made new, this world, other worlds, galaxies, and beyond the universe will be at your disposal to explore, to enjoy. But the greatest enjoyment you will find in our presence forever." "I think she's waking up. Dr. Misra? Here, let me see. Dr. Mark." Their faces were blurry at first, but soon Hope could see them clearly. With her sight restored, also came the memories. Grief crashed into her awareness. Pain clamped her heart, and she started heaving. "Oh, honey, it's okay. Cry. You can cry. Ruth." The doctors had stepped back, allowing Ruth access. She settled onto the clinical bed and gathered Hope into her arms. "Nathan? He's no longer with us." Turning to bury her face in her friend's bosom, Hope wept. The pain was unbearable. After a while, with Ruth's comfort and the relief from pent-up emotions, Hope suddenly sat up. "Momo? Where's Momo?" Ruth laughed quietly. "Baby Moses is fine. He's with Anna and Justin." Hope breathed a sigh of relief. She looked around the small clinical room. Dr. Misra and Dr. Mark had left. "Hope," Ruth continued, "we also have your brother. He was brought back. Boa is holding vigil over him." Ruth's words were filled with compassion. Her eyes glistened with tears. Ignoring the tears once again spilling from her own eyes, Hope struggled to get up, tugging at the IV tube attached to her arm. "Take this out, Ruth. I want to see him." Ruth helped her up. "We'll need to go through the medical center to the adjoining door," she said. "Your brother is in there. We're under code red lockdown. Hope, it's been about half an hour since you were brought back. There's still a war out there on the waters." During the short walk through the medical center to Dr. Misra's laboratory, where Nathan's body was being held, Ruth quickly brought Hope up to date. "Lieutenant Gideon briefed us quickly after you were brought back. Under Agent Mike's command, Prince Adani's agents in the Silver Plains made a strong offense against the Council of Nations forces. It allowed for your and Momo's rescue, along with Eden II's military." "What about the crew from the merchant ship?" Hope asked. "Oh, that's right," Ruth exclaimed, smiling. "They were also rescued." Hope paused, partly from Ruth's words, but also from soreness in her side. Her head also pounded. "All of them were rescued?" "As far as I know." Ruth was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay? Should I get Dr. Mark?" Shaking her head, Hope resumed leaning against Ruth's arm and continued walking. "I must have hit my side when I passed out," she said. Their purpose for visiting the laboratory felt dreadfully strange. It housed a small morgue, which had only been used for a small number of refugees who had expired before they could be brought to the dome. After official documentation, their remains had been returned to the outside world. To date, no legitimate Eden II person had died. Most unwelcome guests had been housed successfully in the dome and then sent back on a cargo ship. There were no graves on the island, and now, just outside the door separating the medical center from the laboratory, Ruth stopped and faced Hope with a serious expression. "Hope, there's something you need to know before you go in." Dread started. What state was her brother in? The shot to his head was forever imprinted on her mind. Had he been badly disfigured? Ruth continued, "Your brother did not return alone." Minutes later, stepping through the laboratory side entrance, words surfaced unbidden into Hope's mind, bringing mixed emotions. Nathan. Married? Nathan's wife? Nathan had a wife. In this open space just before the doors leading to the morgue, Hope paused. She wasn't sure whether to rest her gaze on the woman sitting across from Boa or the covered form on the gurney between them. Her brother. How could he be dead? As if understanding her dilemma, Boa got up and walked over to her. "Let me," he said to Ruth. Ruth stepped aside. Cradling both her elbows in his hands, Boa faced Hope. "I'm so sorry, Hope." He released one elbow and gently cupped the side of her head. "I'm so very sorry." Hope's head fell forward onto his chest as she sobbed once again. Her close circle of friends, including Boa, had all seen Nathan, not just as her twin, but also as their own brother. Seeing Boa's brokenness was hard. This man who was a core foundation to many on the island, and certainly to their tight circle. With Boa's support and Ruth's warm hand moving rhythmically along her back, Hope remained as she was for a moment. Then she remembered the woman, Nathan's wife. "Thank you, Boa," she managed to whisper. He released her and she slowly moved away. She turned to look at the young woman now standing beside the gurney with her hands clenched in front of her. Even though the woman's eyes were swollen and her hair and clothing rumpled, Hope could see she was remarkably beautiful. Hope moved slowly towards her, then stopped. She looked at the still form covered by a white sheet, then back at the woman. I'm Hope Kanisa, Nathan's sister." The woman's eyelids fluttered uncertainly, and her lips were pressed tight and trembling. "Hello, I'm Faith." She paused. "I'm Faith Kanisa, Nathan's wife." Hope knew nothing about this woman, but what she saw in the soulful purity of her big dark eyes, the brave tilt to her head, told her much. Then Agios whispered to her, telling her much more. "She is the beloved of your brother, dear one. She has stood by his side until the very end. She is filled with my essence and is very much your sister." Compassion welled up in Hope. A glitter below Faith's neck caught her attention. A gold chain with a gold lion dangling. Confirmation settled in her soul. This woman, his brother's wife, was indeed her sister. The distance between them wasn't closed by hope, but by faith. They embraced, and love blossomed. New scene. The watcher trembled with uncontrollable fear. Though he had regained his malevolent powers after fleeing the island and shedding the weakened human body, he still was no match for the vengeful giant before him. The battle that his master had retreated from left him enraged and in misery. They had abandoned him to his fate. "I beg your mercy, Chief Michael! I beg your mercy!" he screamed as Agent Mike's massive bright sword sent him flying straight to the abyss, to Malian. That takes us to the end of 38. A lot of grief, a lot of suffering, but there is hope, as she is named. There is hope. And the distance closed between hope and faith, and they embraced and loved, blossomed hope, faith, and love. So join me next time. We will read chapters 39 and 40, and there's an epilogue. We will do it all in one go. So we have one more reading to get to the end of To MILELE. Thanks so much for being with me so far, and I look forward to you being with me next time for the end of To MILELE. Take good care.